Hey, I'm really glad you're here. Take a moment to get comfortable wherever you are. Let your shoulders relax and let the day gently fall away. You don't need to do anything right now. Just listen and let the story unfold at its own pace. Whenever you're ready, we'll begin.
The Islandic night train, the station where the sun forgot to rise. No one in the northern valleys could remember the exact year when the sun first failed to rise above the stone roofs of Hrafnvik station. Zelders argued gently about it over bread and honeyed milk, saying it happened sometime after the third great winter and before the bells of the abbey cracked from frost. But all agreed on one thing. Since that year, the station lived in a permanent twilight, neither night nor day, but a soft, blue-silver hour that felt like a held breath. Hrafnvik station had been built of black basalt and pale pine, its beams carved with knots and runes by hands long turned to dust. Lanterns hung from iron hooks along the platform, glowing amber even at noon, for the sun hovered low behind clouds as thick as old wool blankets. Snow fell often, but never angrily here. It drifted like ash from a distant hearth, settling gently on boots, cloaks, and the quiet thoughts of travelers. Despite the endless dimness, the station was warm. The hearth burned at its heart, fed day and night by the station keeper, old Eirik, whose beard was as white as the snowbanks and whose laugh sounded like a kettle just before it sang. He claimed the fire had been lit by his grandfather's grandfather, and that if it ever went out, the rails themselves would forget where they led. Fire remembers, he often said, poking the embers. Iron remembers, people forget. On this particular evening, or morning, depending on how one counted such things, the station felt fuller than usual. The long wooden benches were occupied by travelers wrapped in cloaks stitched with village symbols: sheep, ravens, stars, waves. Some hummed old tunes. Others dozed with heads resting on travel sacks. A few stared down the tracks, eyes searching the mist as if expecting something they had never seen before. Among them sat Arvid Rowan, a young map-maker from the southern hills, warming his hands around a chipped clay cup of spiced broth. His boots were dusted with snow, his fingers stained faintly with ink, and his satchel bulged with folded parchment and half-finished maps. Arvid had arrived at Hrafnvik station by accident, or so he told himself. He had meant to travel east, toward the warmer fjords, where merchants paid well for maps of safe crossings and honest roads. But storms had other plans. It was a wrong turn here, a frozen pass there, and suddenly he found himself following a rail line that should not have existed according to any chart he owned. Yet here it was. He had asked old Eirik about it earlier that evening. "This line," Arvid said, tapping the parchment, "it isn't marked anywhere. Where does it go?" Old Eirik only smiled, his eyes reflecting the firelight like twin embers. "Depends who's asking," he replied. Now Arvid sat listening to the low music of the station, the crackle of fire, the murmur of voices, the distant wind brushing the eaves. There was no fear in him, only a strange comfort, like the feeling of returning to a childhood home long thought forgotten. At the far end of the platform, a bell hung from a wooden arch. It had not rung in years. Everyone knew this, yet everyone glanced at it now and then, as if expecting it to speak. A woman with silver-threaded braids and a basket of embroidered gloves sat beside Arvid. She offered him one with a smile. "For the cold," she said. "The night likes to nibble fingers." He thanked her and pulled them on. They fit perfectly. "What brings you north?" she asked. "Maps," Arvid answered, "or maybe the lack of them." She laughed softly. That's how it starts for most. Before he could ask what she meant, a child ran across the platform, wooden toy train clutched in his hands. His mother scolded him gently, but the boy only pointed down the tracks. "Listen," he whispered. At first, Arvid heard nothing. Then beneath the wind, beneath the crackle of fire, there came a sound so faint it could have been imagined. A hum, not loud, not mechanical. More like a distant choir warming its voices. The station grew quiet. Old Eirik stood slowly, brushing ash from his apron. His expression was not surprised, only thoughtful, as if an old friend had knocked on the door at last. "Well then," he said, "seems tonight's the night." The bell rang, once, clear and gentle. Lanterns flickered brighter, casting gold along the rails. Snow lifted from the ground as if stirred by invisible hands. The hum grew closer, warmer, and threaded with a rhythm that felt almost like a heartbeat. From the mist beyond the station emerged the train. It was unlike any Arvid had seen or drawn. The engine was long and narrow, its body shaped like a riverboat crossed with a monastery hall. Its sides were paneled in dark wood bound by iron bands etched with age-softened symbols. Windows glowed from within, each one curtained in fabric the color of autumn leaves. There was no smoke, no harsh whistle. The wheels whispered against the rails as if careful not to wake someone sleeping nearby. The Islandic night train had arrived. Doors opened along its length, each releasing a breath of warm, spiced air that smelled of baked bread, pine resin, and something sweetly familiar Arvid could not name. No one rushed forward. Travelers rose calmly, gathering bags, straightening cloaks. Smiles passed between strangers like shared secrets. Even those who looked uncertain did not look afraid. Old Eirik's voice carried softly. "All aboard, those who wish to go. No coin tonight, just stories if you have them." Arvid stood without fully deciding to. His feet moved as if they had been waiting years for this moment. As he approached the nearest door, he noticed something carved above it. Not a destination, a phrase, for those awake enough to notice. Inside, the train was warmer than any hall he had known. Wooden benches cushioned with wool lined the walls. Lamps swayed gently from the ceiling, casting slow, dancing shadows. A kettle steamed near one end of the carriage, and a man with round spectacles poured tea for anyone who asked. Arvid chose a window seat. Outside, Hrafnvik station glowed like a hearth set into the dark earth. Old Eirik stood watching, hand raised in farewell, not sad, not joyful, but content. The train began to move, not with a jolt, but with a sigh. As the station slipped away, something strange happened. The sky, which had long held its dim twilight, deepened into a velvet blue stitched with stars brighter than Arvid had ever seen. Snowflakes outside the window shimmered like falling sparks. Across from him sat the silver-braided woman. She met his gaze and nodded, as if confirming something unspoken. "You see," she said gently, "the sun didn't forget this station." "What then?" Arvid asked. "It stayed behind on purpose," she replied, "so the night would feel welcome." The train rolled onward, steady and calm, carrying laughter, whispers, and the soft clink of teacups. Somewhere down the carriage, someone began telling a story, and others leaned closer to listen. Arvid pulled out his map and tried to mark the path they were taking, but the ink refused to settle. He smiled, folded the parchment away, and let the warmth of the carriage wrap around him like a blanket. For the first time in a long while, he did not feel the need to know where the road led. And far behind them, at the quiet station where the sun chose not to rise, the hearth burned steadily, remembering them all. A ticket printed with no destination. The Islandic night train moved as if it had learned patience from mountains. Its wheels did not clatter or complain. Instead, they sang softly against the rails, a low cradle song that settled into the bones of every passenger. Outside the windows, the world slid past in hues of silver and deep blue, snowfields stitched with moonlight, frozen streams reflecting stars like scattered coins. Inside the carriage, warmth ruled kindly. Lamps swayed with the train's rhythm, their amber glow brushing the wooden walls until the carvings seemed to breathe. Wool curtains fluttered gently at the windows, and the air carried the peaceful scent of tea, old books, and pine smoke. Somewhere farther down the train, a fiddle murmured, not loudly enough to be music, yet only the promise of it. Arvid Rowan sat very still, not from fear, nor even from wonder, but from the rare and precious feeling of being exactly where one was meant to be. His gloved hands rested on his knees. His satchel lay at his feet, forgotten. He watched frost etch slow patterns across the glass, then melt away as the warmth of the carriage reclaimed it. A soft footstep approached. "Ticket, if you please." The voice was neither young nor old. It carried the calm weight of long winters survived and many roads remembered. Arvid looked up. The conductor stood before him. He was tall, wrapped in a coat the color of midnight ink, its fabric thick and worn smooth by time. Silver thread traced quiet symbols along the hem, marks that reminded Arvid of maps drawn not for land, but for moments. The man's hair fell straight and dark to his shoulders, streaked lightly with frost white. His eyes were kind, steady, and deep as a well at dusk. Arvid reached instinctively for his satchel. He hesitated. "I don't believe I was given one." The conductor smiled just slightly. "That happens." He held out a small rectangle of parchment. "Then let us see what you carry instead." Arvid took the ticket. It was warm to the touch. The parchment was thicker than any he had handled, its surface soft like aged leather. Along its edge ran a delicate border of pressed patterns, leaves, stars, wheels turning endlessly forward. At the top, elegant lettering read, Islandic Night Train. Below it, where any sensible ticket would declare a destination, there was nothing. No city, no station name, no final stop. Only a single line written smaller, almost shyly, valid for the length of the journey. Arvid frowned, not in concern but curiosity. "There's no destination," he said. The conductor inclined his head. "Correct. How will I know when to get off?" "When the ticket lets you," the conductor replied, as if this explained everything. Then, gently, "or when you no longer need to ride." Arvid laughed before he could stop himself. It came out warm and honest, surprising him. "Well," he said, "that's refreshingly unclear." The conductor's smile deepened. "Unclear paths are often the kindest." With that, he stamped the ticket, not with ink, but with a small metal seal that pressed warmth into the parchment, leaving behind a faint glowing mark shaped like a wheel beneath a star. "Welcome aboard," the conductor said, and moved on. Arvid turned the ticket over in his hands again and again, as though the destination might appear if he looked from a different angle. It did not. Instead, the parchment seemed content to remain as it was, patient and unbothered. Across from him, the silver-braided woman watched with amusement. "First time?" she asked. "Yes," Arvid admitted. "It shows." She chuckled, pulling her shawl closer. "Only in the way you're still trying to understand it." "Understand what exactly?" She tapped the edge of his ticket lightly. "That this train doesn't ask you where you want to go, only whether you're willing to travel." Before Arvid could respond, a tray appeared at his side, carried by a young attendant with a rosy face and hair tied back with twine. "Night supper," she said cheerfully. "Sweet barley bread, berry preserves, and goat cheese. Tea or milk?" "Tea, please," Arvid replied, still holding the ticket. The attendant poured steaming liquid into a ceramic cup etched with tiny moons. As Arvid sipped, warmth spread through him, not just heat, but a deep comfort, the sort one feels when hearing a familiar story retold beside a hearth. More passengers were settling now. Some spoke quietly. Some gazed out the windows. A pair of elders played a slow game of carved bone tiles, smiling whenever one won and shrugging kindly when they lost. A young couple shared a blanket, whispering plans that sounded like hopes rather than destinations. Arvid noticed something peculiar. No one asked where anyone else was going. In all his travels, that question had always come first, at inns, on ferries, along dusty roads. Where are you headed? Yet here the question seemed unnecessary, even rude. Instead, people asked gentler things. Is this your first winter away from home? Do you prefer your tea sweet or bitter? What stories do you carry? The train rocked softly, as if approving. Eventually, Arvid stood and walked toward the center of the carriage, where a small table held an open ledger bound in green cloth. Beside it lay a box of tickets identical to his own. The conductor stood nearby, gazing out a window where the night had grown darker, richer. "Excuse me," Arvid said. "May I ask something?" The conductor turned. "You may ask many things. Who prints these tickets?" Arvid asked, gesturing to the box. "They're unlike anything I've seen." The conductor regarded the ledger fondly. "They are printed slowly." "Slowly?" "Yes, over years, sometimes decades. Ink alone would not hold what they must carry." Arvid hesitated. "And what do they carry?" The conductor met his eyes. "Read yours aloud." Arvid looked down. Beneath the train's name and the quiet line of validity, he noticed something new, text that had not been there before, written faintly, as though emerging from the parchment itself. He read softly, "Passenger. Arvid Rowan bears maps of places unfinished, seeks warmth without knowing the name of it." His breath caught. "I didn't write that." "No," said the conductor gently, "but you lived it." Arvid felt no fear, only the strange tenderness of being seen completely, without judgment or demand. "Does everyone's ticket do this?" he asked. The conductor nodded. "Eventually." "And when the journey ends, then the ticket rests," the conductor replied, "like a story that has found its final sentence." A bell chimed softly somewhere ahead, not the sharp call of arrival, but a friendly reminder, like a clock telling the hour in a warm kitchen. The conductor closed the ledger. "We will be stopping briefly," he said. "Not to disembark, only to breathe." True to his word, the train slowed until it nearly drifted. Outside, the landscape opened into a wide snowfield dotted with lanterns planted in the ground like stars fallen gently to earth. There were no buildings, no roads, only light and silence. Passengers gathered at the windows. "What is this place?" someone asked. "A pause," replied the conductor. Arvid felt a pleasant drowsiness settle over him. His eyelids grew heavy, though his mind remained clear. He returned to his seat, ticket tucked safely into his coat. The silver-braided woman leaned closer. "May I tell you a secret?" she whispered. "Yes." "I boarded this train 40 winters ago," she said. "I was meant to ride only one night." Arvid blinked. 40, she smiled. "Time behaves differently when you stop asking it where it's going. And have you reached your destination?" She looked around the carriage, at the lamps, the laughter, the gentle night sliding past the windows. "I believe I have," she said, "several times." The train began to move again, unhurried and kind. Arvid leaned back, feeling the ticket warm against his chest, as if responding to his heartbeat. He realized something then, not all at once, but softly, like snow settling. This journey was not about arrival. It was about being carried. As the Islandic night train continued through the endless night, filled with tea steam, quiet stories, and the hush of shared understanding, Arvid closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to listen. The rails remembered the way forward. And the ticket, printed with no destination, was already doing exactly what it was meant to do. The train that arrived without a sound. There are arrivals that announce themselves with thunder. whistles screaming, bells clashing, crowds stirring like startled birds. And then there are arrivals so gentle they feel like memory itself returning, unnoticed until it is already seated beside you. The Islandic night train belonged to the second kind. As it continued its journey through the northern dark, Arvid Rowan began to understand something that no map had ever taught him. This train did not move through the land so much as it was allowed to pass by it. Snow did not crunch beneath its wheels. It leaned aside politely. The rails did not groan under its weight. They hummed, pleased to be useful. The train had arrived without a sound because the world itself was listening. Inside the carriages, the night unfolded like a long-held breath finally released. Lamps glowed steady as hearth embers, their glass chimneys etched with scenes of travelers walking together beneath stars. Shadows rested comfortably in corners, never sharp, never threatening. Even silence here felt companionable. Arvid had moved to a different carriage now, guided by curiosity rather than intention. This one was arranged like an old monastery hall, long wooden tables bolted gently to the floor, benches polished smooth by generations of travelers. At the far end, a wide window curved outward, offering an uninterrupted view of the night. Several passengers sat quietly, sipping broth or tracing patterns in the wood with thoughtful fingers. No one hurried. No one waited for anything in particular. A man with a lute sat near the window, plucking strings so softly the sound barely disturbed the air. His tune had no beginning or end. It simply was like snowfall or breathing. Arvid took a seat across from him. "That's a beautiful melody," Arvid said. The musician smiled, fingers never leaving the strings. "It hasn't decided what it is yet." Arvid nodded, finding that this made perfect sense. Beyond the window, the land shifted slowly. Hills rose and fell like sleeping animals beneath their blankets of snow. Frozen lakes reflected the sky so perfectly that it was impossible to tell where Earth ended and stars began. Occasionally, lights appeared in the distance. Lonely cottages, watchfires, or lanterns hung from unseen hands, each glowing warmly, never asking the train to stop. "Does the train ever make noise?" Arvid asked. The musician tilted his head. "Not when it's doing things properly." Before Arvid could ask what that meant, the carriage door opened. The conductor entered, carrying a lantern that burned with a pale gold flame. He did not raise it high. The light seemed to know where it was needed, spilling gently across faces without glare. "Friends," the conductor said softly, "we will soon pass through a listening valley." A murmur of quiet excitement rippled through the carriage. "What happens there?" someone asked. "We listen," the conductor replied. Arvid felt a subtle shift in the air, as if the train itself had lowered its voice. The wheels grew even quieter until the sensation of movement became almost imaginary. Outside, the night thickened, deepening into velvet darkness stitched with frostlight. The valley appeared suddenly, not announced, not framed, simply present. And tall cliffs rose on either side of the track, their faces carved by wind into smooth, ancient curves. Snow clung to ledges like white fur. Above, the sky narrowed, stars peering down like curious eyes, and then Arvid heard it. Not a sound made by the valley, but sounds held within it. Laughter, faint and distant, footsteps crunching long ago. The echo of a bell rung by a hand that no longer existed. Arvid's chest tightened, not with sadness, but with recognition. These were not ghosts, nor memories in the usual sense. They were moments the valley had loved enough to keep. Passengers closed their eyes, one by one. The silver-braided woman stood near the window now. Her eyes glistened, though she was smiling. "This is where the train learns," she whispered. "Learns what?" Arvid asked. "How to arrive without disturbing what matters." The train glided forward, its presence so light that even the echoes did not scatter. Arvid realized then why the Islandic night train arrived without a sound. It did not wish to overwrite anything. When they emerged from the valley, the night felt warmer somehow, as though the world itself had approved their passing. The conductor moved among the passengers, lantern held low. "Tea," he asked one elder. "A story," he offered another. When he reached Arvid, he paused. "You noticed," the conductor said. "Yes," Arvid replied. "The train doesn't demand space." The conductor smiled. "Exactly. Loud arrivals are for those afraid they won't be remembered." They continued on. Later that night, or what passed for night in a journey where time softened, Arvid found himself drawn toward the front of the train. A narrow passage led to a smaller carriage he had not seen before. Its door was unmarked. Inside, the space was circular, with a single bench running along the walls. At the center stood a low table bearing a bowl of water so still it reflected the lamps like captured moons. Only one other passenger sat there, a young girl, perhaps 12 winters old, knitting something small and careful. She looked up and smiled. "You can sit," she said. Arvid did. "What is this place?" he asked. "The quiet car," she replied, "for arrivals." "But we're already on the train." She nodded. "Yes, but sometimes people arrive inside themselves." He watched the water ripple faintly, though nothing touched it. "Does the train ever stop loudly?" he asked her. She shook her head. "No, loud stops break things." "What things?" "Fragile hopes," she said simply, and returned to her knitting. Arvid sat with that thought for a long while. Eventually, the train slowed, not stopping, but easing into a gentler rhythm. Outside, a cluster of buildings appeared. Low stone houses, their roofs glowing faintly under snow, windows lit like small suns. The train passed directly through the village, not beside it, through it, yet nothing broke. Doors remained closed, lanterns did not flicker, sleeping dogs did not stir. The train threaded the village like a thought passing through a dream. Arvid leaned closer to the glass. Inside one window, he saw a baker asleep at his table, flour dusting his beard. In another, a child curled beneath quilts, clutching a wooden train toy. None heard the passing. "That village," the silver-braided woman said, standing beside him, has not had visitors in 100 years. Why does the train go through it, then? Arvid asked. So it remembers it is not forgotten. The village slipped behind them, untouched and whole. Later still, the conductor rang a small bell, not to announce a stop, but to gather attention. Friends, he said, we welcome new arrivals. Arvid turned, confused. The train doors opened silently. From the night stepped 3 figures, an old shepherd, a young scholar, and a woman carrying a basket of apples. None looked surprised to be there. Snow melted gently from their cloaks as they entered. "Welcome aboard," several passengers said at once. The newcomers smiled, warming their hands by the nearest lamp. No one asked where they came from. No one asked where they were going. Arvid realized then that arrival did not require movement. Sometimes it required only readiness. The conductor caught Arvid's eye and inclined his head. "You see now," he said quietly. "The train that arrives without a sound can arrive anywhere." As the Islandic night train continued on, wrapped in warmth, quiet laughter, and the careful kindness of not disturbing what slept, Arvid felt something settle within him. He no longer needed to announce himself to the world. He was content to be carried. Outside, the stars shone brighter, as if pleased by the gentleness of it all. Inside, the train glided onward, a moving hearth in the endless night. Then somewhere far ahead, unseen but patient, more quiet arrivals waited. Strangers wrapped in silence and wool. If one listened carefully enough to hear beyond sound, one could tell when the Islandic night train welcomed new souls into its long, quiet family. It was not by footsteps, nor by doors opening, nor even by the shifting of air. It was by the deepening of warmth. That night, the warmth grew richer. Arvid Rowan noticed it first in the way the lamps glowed fuller, their amber light rounding the edges of every shadow until nothing felt sharp. Then he felt it in his shoulders, as though an unseen hand had settled a heavier cloak upon him, stitched with comfort rather than cloth. He had moved again, wandering gently through the carriages as one wanders through rooms of a familiar home while others sleep. Each carriage had its own spirit. One smelled of fresh bread and cinnamon. Another held shelves of old books chained loosely with twine, so they would not wander off on their own. Yet another was filled with baskets of wool, yarn, and half-finished garments, needles clicking softly like rain on a roof. It was in this last carriage that Arvid stopped. Here, strangers sat side by side on long benches, wrapped in shawls, cloaks, and blankets thick enough to soften even the hardest memories. No one spoke loudly. Some did not speak at all. Yet there was no awkwardness, no loneliness. Silence rested among them like a shared language. An elderly man with a beard braided into careful loops sat hunched over a spindle, twisting wool into thread. Beside him, a young woman with tired eyes stitched patches onto a traveler's cloak. Across from them, a broad-shouldered fisher hummed a tune without words, his voice low and steady. Arvid took a seat among them. No one asked his name. No one asked his purpose. The woman stitching looked up and smiled, then held out a needle. "Hold this," she said softly. Arvid did, without question. She guided his hands patiently, showing him how to pull the thread through thick fabric. His stitches were uneven at first, but no one corrected him. The act itself seemed to matter more than the result. "Why so quiet?" Arvid eventually whispered. The elderly man answered without looking up. "Because silence is warm when shared." The fisher nodded. "Words can wait," he added. "Cold can't." Arvid smiled. Around them, the train moved steadily, rocking gently like a cradle. Outside the windows, snow fell thicker now, not harsh or blinding, but soft as down. The night pressed close, curious but respectful. One by one, more passengers entered the carriage. They came from different parts of the train, some from the T-car, others from the quiet car, some newly arrived from the night itself. Each wore wool in some form, cloaks mended many times, shawls gifted by forgotten hands, blankets that smelled faintly of hearth smoke and old homes. They sat wherever there was space, and still no one asked anything. Arvid felt something loosen in his chest. In all his years of travel, he had learned to introduce himself quickly, to explain his trade, to justify his presence. Here, none of that was required. He was allowed to exist without explanation. The conductor passed through briefly, pausing at the doorway. He surveyed the scene with approval. "Good," he murmured. "The wool car fills nicely tonight." He stepped away, lantern light dimming as he went. A child sat near Arvid now, wrapped in a blanket far too large for her. Only her nose and eyes peeked out. She watched the others with solemn curiosity. "Is everyone here a stranger?" she asked him quietly. Arvid considered the question. "I think so," he said, "at least at first." She nodded thoughtfully. "Then why does it feel like family?" Arvid did not answer right away. The elderly man with the spindle spoke instead. "Because family is not who you know," he said. "It's who keeps you warm when the night grows long." The child seemed satisfied by this. Time passed, but gently, without insistence. Stitches formed. Yarn-filled baskets. Someone passed around cups of hot milk sweetened with honey. Another offered dried apples, their skins wrinkled like smiling faces. Eventually, conversation returned, not rushed, not forced. A woman spoke of a lighthouse she once tended on a coast where storms sang louder than choirs. A quiet scholar recited a poem he had memorized in youth, its verses worn smooth by love. The fisher described a sea that glowed at night, as if stars had learned to swim. Each story was received with nods, murmurs, and smiles. No one interrupted. No one hurried the telling. When Arvid finally spoke, he surprised himself. "I make maps," he said. Several heads turned toward him, not sharply, just enough to listen. "But the more I travel," he continued, "the more I realize maps can't show everything." The woman who had taught him to stitch smiled. "Good," she said. "Then you're learning. What can't they show?" the child asked. Arvid thought of the listening valley. The village passed through without waking, the ticket that warmed against his chest. They can't show where you belong, he said slowly. Only where you've been brave enough to walk. Silence followed, but it was a warm one. Outside, the snow eased. Stars returned, brighter now, as though drawn closer by the glow of the train. Later, when hands grew tired and stories thinned into comfortable quiet, the carriage dimmed. Lamps lowered themselves slightly, as if bowing. Blankets were shared. Heads rested on shoulders without permission being asked, and none being required. Arvid leaned back, feeling the gentle weight of wool around him, the steady motion beneath him. He realized something then. These strangers were not bound by names, nor trades, nor destinations. They were bound by a shared agreement to travel kindly, to keep one another warm, and to let the night be gentle. The train slowed for a moment, not stopping, just breathing. Outside, a wide plain stretched under moonlight. In the distance, fires burned in circles, as if invisible villages were gathered around unseen hearths. The silver-braided woman appeared at the doorway, her shawl dusted with snow that did not melt. "This is a good stretch of the journey," she said quietly. "Why?" Arvid asked. "Because everyone is wrapped properly now," she replied. The train moved on. Arvid closed his eyes, not to sleep deeply, but to rest. Around him, strangers breathed in unison, wrapped in wool, silence, and trust. The rails sang softly beneath them. For the first time, Arvid understood that loneliness was not the absence of people. It was the absence of shared warmth. And here, on the Islandic night train, even strangers knew how to keep the cold away. Windows showing lands that do not exist. There comes a moment on every long journey when the traveler realizes the road has begun to dream. On the Islandic night train, that moment arrived not with fanfare, nor with warning, but with a soft change in the light. Arvid Rowan noticed it when he opened his eyes and found the lamps glowing a shade deeper than before, their amber hearts tinged with colors that did not belong to fire alone: rose, pale green, the faint blue of distant dawns. The wool car was quieter now. Many passengers slept, wrapped together like stories folded carefully away. Others remained awake, gazing out the windows as though reading a book written slowly across the night. Arvid rose and moved closer to the glass. At first, the landscape beyond looked familiar enough. Rolling snowfields, dark pines standing like patient guards, hills curved gently under starlight. Then, without any jolt or sudden shift, the view changed. The snow thinned. The trees bent strangely, their branches braided with silver leaves. The sky widened, layered with drifting lights that shimmered like floating lanterns without strings. Arvid's breath caught. Outside the window lay a valley no map had ever named. A river flowed there, not frozen, but glowing softly from within, its waters carrying reflections of places that were not present. Along its banks stood houses built from stone and wood and something like memory itself. Their windows were lit warmly, and figures moved inside, cooking, laughing, mending, living lives that felt complete and unhurried. Yet something was unmistakably strange. The land did not behave like land. Mountains curved inward as if listening. Paths rearranged themselves gently, leading not where they should, but where they were needed. The stars above shifted slightly, forming patterns that seemed to respond to the train's passing. "This place," Arvid whispered. "It does not exist," said a calm voice beside him. The conductor had appeared, lantern held low, its light mingling easily with the glow from beyond the glass. "Then what am I seeing?" Arvid asked. The conductor considered. "You are seeing where the heart goes when the world does not make room for it." Other passengers gathered quietly behind them. No one spoke loudly. Some pressed palms to the glass. Others simply watched, smiling softly as though greeting an old friend. A man from the wool car murmured, "I've seen this land before." "When?" asked Arvid. "In winter," the man replied. "When my village burned and we had nowhere to go." A woman nodded. "I saw it once while crossing the sea alone." The silver-braided woman joined them, her reflection mingling with the glowing valley beyond. "These are the places we carry," she said. "Not built of earth, but of longing and kindness." The train slowed, not to stop, but to linger. As it did, the windows began to change again. Now Arvid saw a coastline washed in moonlight, its cliffs carved into shapes resembling faces turned skyward. Below, waves rolled in silence, each crest carrying tiny lights like stars learning to swim. Boats rested safely at shore, though no ropes tied them down. In another window, a city appeared, one Arvid recognized and yet did not. Its towers were shaped like books stacked carefully upon one another. Bridges arched gently over canals that reflected not buildings but moments. A child's first laugh, a farewell waved too late, a promise kept quietly. "This is impossible," Arvid said softly. "Yes," replied the conductor. "That is why it is safe here." As the train glided onward, carriage by carriage filled with quiet wonder. No one reached for ink or parchment. These lands were not meant to be recorded. They were meant to be witnessed. Arvid moved through the train, looking through different windows. In one, he saw a forest where the trees bore doors instead of bark. Some doors were open, glowing warmly inside. Others were closed, patient, waiting. Travelers walked the paths there slowly, choosing carefully which doors to approach. In another, he saw a great hall filled with long tables, every seat occupied by people eating together, some living, some long gone. No one asked why the dead were there. They belonged. A child tugged at Arvid's sleeve. "Look," she whispered. Outside her window, a small cottage stood alone on a hill. Smoke curled from its chimney. Inside, an old woman sat by a fire, knitting steadily. A man entered, kissed her forehead, and hung his coat. Arvid's chest tightened. "That's my grandmother's house," he said, voice barely audible. "But it burned down years ago." The conductor knelt beside them. "Not everything that ends is lost," he said gently. The child smiled. "It looks warm." "It is," Arvid agreed. As the train continued, the visions shifted, not rushing, not overwhelming. Each window showed a different impossible land, yet all shared a common truth: they were whole. No wars raged there, no hunger gnawed. Loss existed, yes, but it had been given a place to rest. Eventually, the conductor rang a small bell. The windows dimmed slightly, the lands fading like embers settling into ash. The night beyond returned to snow and stars and familiar dark. Passengers exhaled softly, as if waking from a shared dream. "Will we see them again?" Arvid asked. The conductor stood. "When you need to remember," he said, and only then. Arvid returned to his seat. The ticket in his coat felt warmer than ever. The silver-braided woman sat beside him. "You make maps," she said quietly. "Yes. Do you wish you could draw those lands?" Arvid thought of ink refusing to settle, of parchment resisting truth. "No," he said slowly. "If I drew them, people would try to reach them." She nodded. "And they are not meant to be reached, only remembered," Arvid said. The train rolled on, steady and kind. Later, as lamps dimmed and passengers drifted towards sleep, Arvid remained awake, watching the ordinary night return its familiar face. Snow fell again, pines passed, the rails hummed, yet something had changed. The world felt wider, not heavier, not more complicated, but kinder in its impossibility. Arvid understood now that not all real places could be visited, and not all true things could be mapped. Some lands existed only to remind travelers that warmth, belonging, and peace were possible, even if only for a while. As the Islandic night train carried them deeper into the night, Arvid rested his head against the window, smiling softly. Outside, somewhere beyond sight, impossible lands waited patiently. And inside, the journey continued, gentle, joyful, and warm. The conductor who never gave his name. There are some people whose names feel unnecessary, not because they lack importance, but because their presence is complete without labels, like fire or moonlight or the sound of snow falling at night. The conductor of the Islandic night train was such a person. Arvid Rowan realized this only after he noticed that, despite all the conversations shared, all the tea poured, all the gentle guidance given, no one had ever spoken the conductor's name. Not once. The realization came to him sometime after the windows had returned to showing the ordinary night, snowfields, distant hills, stars steady and kind. Passengers settled again into quiet rhythms, some reading, some knitting, some sleeping with the peace of those who trusted where they were being carried. Arvid sat with his back against the warm wooden wall of the carriage, ticket resting over his heart. He watched the conductor move from car to car, lantern in hand, checking on small things that somehow mattered greatly, adjusting a lamp wick, straightening a slipped blanket, pausing to listen when someone spoke softly. He did all this without hurry, and without ever being called by name. Arvid frowned thoughtfully. In all the places he had traveled, towns, ports, monasteries, market roads, names were anchors. They fixed a person in the world. They told others how to call them back. And yet here on this train, the absence of a name felt right. When the conductor entered the carriage again, Arvid gathered his courage. "May I ask you something?" he said. The conductor smiled, as he always did, as though questions were small gifts rather than interruptions. "You may." Arvid hesitated. "What is your name?" The lantern flame flickered, not dimming, not brightening, simply shifting as if amused. The conductor considered the question carefully, with the patience of someone who had been asked it before. "I do not give it," he said at last. "You do not have one?" Arvid asked gently. "So I have had many," the conductor replied. "I simply do not carry them anymore." Arvid absorbed this. "Why not?" The conductor gestured toward the windows where the night rolled past untroubled. "Names belong to places," he said, "and I am always in between." They walked slowly together down the carriage, the conductor's steps soundless on the wood. "When I had a name," the conductor continued, "people used it to ask me to stay, or to leave, or to become something specific." "And now?" Arvid asked. "Now," said the conductor, "I am free to be what the journey needs." They stopped near the door that led to the forward cars. The air here felt different, older perhaps, or deeper, like the hush inside a chapel before dawn. Arvid glanced at the conductor's lantern. "Does it have a name?" he asked, half smiling. The conductor chuckled softly. "No, but it knows when to shine." They stood in companionable silence for a while. Eventually, Arvid spoke again. "How long have you been guiding this train?" The conductor looked out the window, eyes reflecting starlight. "Longer than the rails," he said. "Shorter than the night." Arvid laughed quietly. "You speak in riddles." "Only when speaking plainly would be unkind," the conductor replied. Further along the train, a bell chimed, soft, low, friendly. The sound rippled gently through the carriages, signaling not a stop, but a gathering. Passengers emerged from their seats, drawn toward the central hall carriage. Arvid followed, curiosity warm in his chest. The hall was brighter now. Long tables were set with bread, stews, fruits preserved in honey, and small cups of dark, spiced drink. The smell alone felt like an embrace. "This is for you," the conductor announced, "and for those who were once you." No one questioned the meaning. They took seats, passed bowls, broke bread. Laughter rose, not loud, but rich, like music played on old strings. Arvid found himself seated beside the silver-braided woman and across from the elderly man with the spindle. "To the conductor," the woman said, raising her cup. "To the journey," the elderly man added. "To not knowing," said the child, grinning. Cups clinked softly. Arvid lifted his own cup. "To the one who never gave his name," he said. The conductor inclined his head, neither accepting nor refusing the toast. As they ate, stories began to flow, not grand tales of conquest or loss, but small ones. A mist turn that led to a kinder road. A winter survived because a stranger shared fire. A night spent listening instead of speaking. Arvid shared one too. "I once spent 3 months mapping a mountain pass," he said. "I measured every stone, every incline. When I finished, a shepherd told me the path had shifted with the spring melt." Laughter rippled. "What did you do?" someone asked. I burned the map, Arvid said. And followed the shepherd. The conductor smiled. As the meal ended, the lamps dimmed slightly, signaling rest. Passengers drifted back to their places, full and content. Some sang softly. Others whispered good nights. Arvid lingered near the conductor as the hall emptied. Will you ever take a name again? He asked. The conductor considered. Perhaps, he said, when I stop moving. And when will that be? The conductor's eyes softened. When the last traveler no longer feels lost. They walked toward the front of the train, where the engine hummed like a sleeping giant. May I ask one more thing? Arvid said. You may. Do you know where all this leads? The conductor opened a small door. Warm light spilled out, revealing a narrow platform overlooking the rails stretching endlessly ahead. I know how it feels, he said. That is enough. They stood there together, watching the tracks flow beneath them, silver and steady. Arvid felt something settle into place, not certainty, not answers, but trust. Thank you, he said. The conductor placed a hand briefly over Arvid's shoulder. For riding, he replied. Later, back in his seat, Arvid reflected on what he had learned. Names, he realized, were like maps, useful, meaningful, but not always necessary. Some guides did not need to be called to be followed. The Islandic night train moved on through the gentle night, conductor nameless, passengers content, destination unspoken. And for the first time, Arvid felt no urge to define where he was going. It was enough to be carried. Outside, the stars wheeled slowly, approving. Inside, the train glowed, a moving hearth, guided by a man who needed no name at all. Midnight stops at abandoned snow villages. There are places the world steps away from without fully meaning to. Not out of cruelty, nor even forgetfulness, but because time, like a river, sometimes chooses a different bend. Villages empty slowly. Fires grow fewer. Doors close, not in anger, but in completion. Snow settles, patient and forgiving. The Islandic night train knew all such places. That night, as the stars tilted slightly and the lamps inside the carriages glowed with a softer gold, the conductor rang his bell, not once but twice. The sound traveled gently through the train, sinking into wood and wool alike. We will make midnight stops, he announced. No one is required to leave. No one is forbidden to step down. Passengers stirred, not with excitement, but recognition. Cloaks were adjusted, boots tightened. A quiet readiness filled the air. Arvid Rowan felt it too. The train slowed, its movement easing until the rails beneath seemed to sigh with relief. Outside, shapes emerged from the dark. Low stone houses half buried in snow, narrow lanes softened by drifts, fences leaning gently like tired shoulders. An abandoned village. Lanterns along the train brightened, casting warm paths of light onto the snow below. The doors opened soundlessly, releasing breath after breath of golden warmth into the cold night. No wind rushed in, no cold bit. The night accepted the light politely. Arvid stepped down. The snow beneath his boots did not crunch. It yielded softly, as if remembering footsteps long gone. Around him, other passengers moved quietly, some alone, some in pairs, some hand in hand. No one spoke loudly. The village lay still, yet it did not feel empty. Windows, though dark, seemed aware. Doorways stood open just enough to welcome memory. A church bell tower rose at the far end, its bell long silent but unbroken. The conductor stood near the train, lantern raised slightly. "Take your time," he said. "The village has waited." Arvid walked down a narrow lane, guided by instinct rather than sight. He passed a well capped with ice, a cart half swallowed by snow, a row of houses with roofs sagging gently under winter's weight. At one door he paused. Something pulled at him, not sadness, but familiarity. He pushed the door open. Inside, the house was untouched by decay. A table stood set with wooden bowls. A chair lay tipped near the hearth, as if someone had risen suddenly, then simply never returned. Arvid stepped inside, heart steady. The hearth was cold, but when he knelt and placed his gloved hand upon the stone, warmth bloomed beneath his palm. Not fire, memory. Laughter echoed faintly, children chasing one another, a voice calling them back for supper. The smell of bread rose, soft and sweet. Arvid closed his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, to the house, to the night, to whatever had remained. Outside, other passengers experienced their own quiet moments. The silver-braided woman stood before a small cottage, tears slipping freely down her cheeks, yet she was smiling. The elderly man with the spindle sat on a doorstep, spinning wool slowly, returning thread to a place that once knew it. The child ran through snow that did not wet her boots, giggling softly, chased by shadows shaped like old friends. The village responded. The lanterns flickered to life, one by one, though no hands lit them. Doors creaked open a little wider. Snow slid gently from rooftops, revealing carvings, symbols, names once loved. This was not resurrection. It was acknowledgement. Arvid emerged from the house and looked toward the church. Its doors stood open now, candlelight glowing within. Drawn by curiosity, he entered. Inside, benches lined the nave, polished smooth by generations of hands. At the altar, candles burned steadily, their flames tall and calm. Figures filled the benches, not fully solid, not transparent either. They looked like reflections in water, gentle and real enough. The villagers. They turned toward Arvid, smiling not with longing but peace. An old woman nodded. "A traveler," she said. "Yes," Arvid replied. "You carry maps," said another. "I do." "Then remember this place," said a man with a kind, tired face. "Not to return, but to know it was enough." Arvid bowed his head. "I will," he promised. The figures faded, not vanishing, but settling like embers beneath ash. Outside, the conductor watched the village quietly. When the bell rang again, soft, low, passengers began to return. None were hurried, none resisted. Arvid stepped back onto the train. As the doors closed, the lanterns in the village dimmed, not extinguished, just resting. Snow fell again, gentle as a blanket being tucked. The train moved on. Soon another village appeared. Then another, each different, each quiet, each complete. In one, Arvid found a schoolhouse with chalk still resting by the board. In another, a blacksmith's forge cold but unbroken. In another, a square where footprints formed a dance that never ended. At every stop, the train waited patiently. No one tried to stay. That was the unspoken rule. Eventually, near what felt like the deepest part of night, the train made its final stop of the hour. This village was smaller than the others, only 3 houses and a watchtower. Snow covered everything deeply here, smoothing edges until nothing looked sharp. Arvid stepped down again. At the edge of the village, he found a single marker, a wooden post carved with no name, just a symbol of a hearth. He understood then. Not all places were remembered by words. Some were remembered by warmth alone. When he returned to the train, the conductor met him at the door. "Did you find what you needed?" he asked. "Yes," Arvid said. "What was it?" Arvid smiled. "That leaving does not mean forgetting." The conductor nodded approvingly. The train resumed its journey, wheels humming softly. Inside, passengers settled back into seats and blankets. Some slept more deeply now. Others stared thoughtfully into the night. Arvid leaned against the window, watching the abandoned villages fade into darkness, not lost, not erased, but complete. He realized something important. The Islandic night train did not stop to reclaim the past. It stopped to honor it. Outside, dawn did not come, yet the night felt brighter than ever. The journey continued, gentle and sure, toward whatever waited next. Dreams that began to travel without sleep. It began so quietly that no one could later say when exactly the change had happened. There was no bell, no announcement, no shift in speed or light. Only this, the sense that something invisible had stood up, stretched, and begun to walk. On the Islandic night train, sleep had always been a gentle companion. Passengers drifted into it naturally, like birds tucking heads beneath wings. But on this stretch of the journey, many noticed they were no longer sleeping, yet still dreaming. Arvid Rowan realized it when he blinked. He had been gazing out the window, watching the snow-dark plains slide past in calm rhythm. He blinked once slowly, and when his eyes opened again, the world had not changed, yet it felt fuller, as if a second layer had quietly laid itself atop the first. The lamps glowed the same, the train moved the same, but meaning had grown thicker in the air. Across from him, the child sat upright, feet not quite touching the floor. Her eyes were wide, but not startled. "I'm not asleep," she said. "Neither am I," Arvid replied. She smiled. Good. Down the carriage, murmurs spread, not confusion, but wonder. "I can see it," whispered a woman. "So can I," answered another, "without closing my eyes." The conductor passed through, lantern steady. "Remain where you are," he said gently. "You are safe." Outside the windows, the land began to respond. Snow still fell, but each flake carried a faint image inside it. A loaf of bread, a spinning wheel, a hand reaching for another. They melted upon touching the glass, leaving no trace except a warm feeling in the chest. Arvid stood and walked slowly toward the center of the carriage. His boots made sound, but softer than usual, as if the floor itself wished not to interrupt. In the wool car, something extraordinary was happening. People were dreaming aloud, not speaking, dreaming. A man sat with eyes open, yet his hands moved as if casting a net into unseen water. Around him, the scent of the sea rose, salt, kelp, moonlit waves, though no water appeared. Nearby, the silver-braided woman traced patterns in the air with her finger. Where she traced, images shimmered briefly. A lighthouse glowing against storm, a kitchen table lit for supper, a road leading home. "These are not visions," she said softly when Arvid approached. "They are travelers." "What do you mean?" Arvid asked. "Dreams don't always belong to sleep," she replied. "Sometimes they grow strong enough to walk." In another carriage, a long unused piano sat against the wall. No one had touched it earlier. Now its keys pressed themselves gently, playing a melody slow and kind. Passengers gathered, not to applaud, but to listen. Each note carried something with it. The memory returned gently to its owner. A regret loosened its grip. A hope stood up straighter. Arvid felt his own dream stir. Not a sleeping dream, but the quiet one he had carried for years without naming. The desire to make maps that helped people feel less lost, rather than simply showing them where they were. The ticket in his coat pulsed softly, warm as breath. He removed it. New words had appeared. Learns that direction is not the same as meaning begins to trust the path beneath his feet. Arvid exhaled slowly. The conductor appeared beside him. "This stretch of rail," the conductor said, "is where dreams test their legs." "Where are they going?" Arvid asked. The conductor smiled. "Where they are welcome." The train slowed slightly, not stopping, but easing into a rhythm that felt like walking pace. Outside, shapes gathered along the tracks, not people, not animals, but possibilities. They glowed faintly, like embers choosing where to settle. Some drifted close to the windows, then turned away, unready. Others followed the train for a time, matching its speed, before peeling off gently into the night. A few slipped inside. One settled beside the child, who laughed softly as it curled around her shoulders like a scarf. Another hovered near the elderly man with the spindle, then sank into the wool he spun, strengthening the thread. Arvid felt one brush past his cheek, not entering, just acknowledging. It smelled faintly of ink and pine smoke. In the quiet car, the bowl of water rippled again. This time, reflections rose from it, scenes not yet lived, but nearly so. A bridge repaired, a letter written at last. A hand offered help without being asked. No one panicked. No one clung too tightly. Dreams here were not desperate. They were patient. The train passed through a low valley where mist hung thick and luminous. Within it, dreams detached fully from their dreamers, floating freely now, small lights bobbing like lanterns on a festival night. The conductor raised his lantern slightly. "This is where some will leave us," he said. The passengers watched as dreams drifted away from the train, settling into the valley, embedding themselves into the land. waiting for the right waking moment, the right traveler, the right kindness. Will they forget us? The child asked. The conductor knelt. No, he said. They will remember you by how gently you let them go. The train moved on. Gradually, the air thinned. The extra layer of meaning eased back into the ordinary world. Lamps returned to simple amber. Snow became just snow again. Passengers blinked. Some stretched. Some laughed quietly. Some wiped tears they had not noticed falling. No one felt tired. Arvid returned to his seat, heart full but light. He realized something important. Dreams did not require sleep to live. They required safety. They required warmth. They required permission. The Islandic night train provided all three. As the night rolled onward, Arvid rested his head against the window. He was awake, fully awake, and yet the world had never felt more dreamlike in the best way. Outside, far ahead, the rails curved gently toward whatever came next. Inside, dreams walked on, soft-footed, hopeful, unafraid. The question no passenger dared to ask. The question did not arrive all at once. It arrived the way frost does, slowly, gently, without noise, until suddenly everything was outlined by it. No one spoke it aloud at first, not because it was forbidden, not because it was frightening, but because everyone felt it at the same time, and no one wished to break the warmth by naming it too soon. The Islandic night train continued its steady journey through the snowlit dark. After the drifting dreams had gone their ways, the carriages settled into a quieter peace than before, one that felt earned. People sat differently now, straighter but softer, as if something inside them had been set gently in place. Arvid Rowan noticed it when he looked around. The man with the spindle had stopped spinning, not because the wool was finished, but because he was simply holding it, content to feel its weight. The silver-braided woman hummed without realizing she did so, the tune weaving itself into the hum of the rails. The child leaned against the window, tracing slow circles in the frost, smiling at nothing in particular. Joy was everywhere, but it was a quiet joy, the kind that invites reflection, and reflection inevitably invites questions. Arvid felt it stir inside him like a bird shifting in its nest. What happens when the train stops? He did not say it. He did not need to. Across the aisle, a young couple exchanged a look, just a glance, really, but it carried the same shape of thought. In the next carriage, a baker pressed his palm to his chest as if checking whether something precious was still there. The question was not about destination. Everyone already knew the destination existed. The question was about after the lamps dim, after the doors open. It's after the night releases them back into their ordinary days. Would this warmth remain? Would the dreams remember how to walk once daylight demanded their attention? The conductor sensed it before anyone spoke. He always did. He slowed his steps as he moved through the carriages, not wishing to disturb the growing stillness. His lantern cast familiar halos along the walls, touching faces that looked peaceful but thoughtful. At last, in the central carriage, someone found the courage. It was the elderly baker, flour still dusted faintly into the lines of his hands. "Sir," he said, voice respectful and calm, "may I ask something?" The conductor stopped. He turned fully, giving the man his complete attention. "You may," he said. The baker hesitated, then spoke carefully, as if placing a fragile bowl on a table. "When we arrive, will this feeling," he searched for the word, "stay with us?" The silence that followed was not tense, it was tender. Every passenger leaned slightly forward, not physically, but inwardly, listening with their whole selves. The conductor did not answer immediately. Instead, he lifted his lantern a little higher. The light did not brighten, but it deepened. "Let me tell you a story," he said. The train did not slow. But somehow it felt as if the night itself leaned closer. Long ago, long before tracks were laid across the island, before iron learned to follow intention, there was a village that believed joy was a visitor. It came, they said, when it wished. It left without apology. So when joy arrived, the villagers held their breath. They whispered. They tiptoed. They tried not to frighten it away. They celebrated quietly, loved carefully, laughed with one hand covering their mouths, and yet joy always left. One winter, a traveler passed through the village. He stayed the night, warmed by their fires, fed by their tables. He noticed how carefully they lived around their happiness. "Why do you treat joy like a bird that will fly?" he asked. "Because it always does," the villagers replied. The traveler smiled gently. "Have you tried building a place for it to land?" The villagers did not understand, so the traveler stayed. He taught them how to make joy useful, not spectacular, not overwhelming, useful. They baked bread even when they were tired. They fixed roofs before storms arrived. They spoke kindly when it would have been easier to stay silent. Joy noticed. It returned not as a visitor, but as a habit, and it stayed. The conductor lowered his lantern. "The feeling you carry tonight," he said, "is not meant to be kept untouched. It is meant to be used." Arvid felt something settle into him at those words. Used, not preserved in glass, not hidden away for special occasions. Used. "For some of you," the conductor continued, "it will appear as patience. For others, courage. For others still, a gentle refusal to forget what mattered on this night." The child raised her hand. "Yes," the conductor said. "What if we forget anyway?" she asked. The conductor smiled, not sadly but kindly. "Then," he said, "the feeling will wait for you to remember." A soft laugh rippled through the carriage. The question, now spoken, did not grow heavier. It grew lighter. Passengers began to talk, not loudly, but openly. A woman spoke of writing letters she had postponed. A man admitted he would walk slower to notice his town again. The baker said he would leave an extra loaf on the windowsill each morning, just in case. Arvid listened, heart full. He realized the question had already answered itself. The warmth would stay, not as a sensation, but as a direction. The train passed through a stretch where the snow thinned, revealing dark earth beneath. Small lights dotted the distance, villages sleeping, lives waiting. The conductor moved on. As he passed Arvid, he paused. "You haven't asked your question," he said softly. Arvid considered. "I think I already know the answer," he replied. The conductor nodded. "That is usually how it works." The ticket in Arvid's pocket warmed again. He took it out one last time. No new words appeared. Instead, the old ones felt complete. The train began a gentle descent. Not toward an ending, but toward a beginning shaped like morning. The lamps dimmed slightly, not because the night was ending, but because they were no longer needed as much. People settled back into their seats. Some closed their eyes, some didn't, but all of them carried the same quiet certainty. Whatever waited beyond the final stop, it would recognize them, because they would arrive warmer than they had left, where the night chose to stay. The Islandic night train had traveled farther than anyone could recall, through listening valleys, abandoned villages, lands that did not exist, and stretches where dreams themselves walked alongside travelers. Yet tonight, there was a sense in the air, delicate but undeniable. The journey was approaching its deepest truth. Arvid Rowan noticed it first in the lamps. Their amber glow no longer flickered or leaned toward him. It softened, spreading evenly across the carriages, as though the train itself had relaxed. The warmth in the seats, in the blankets, in the very air, felt fuller, settled. Not clinging, not demanding, merely present. Passengers sensed it too. They moved differently, spoke differently, breathed differently. Each carried the quiet magic of the night inside them, not as something borrowed, but something earned. The silver-braided woman sat across from Arvid, knitting a scarf of deep green wool. She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting lamplight and snowlight alike. "It feels different tonight," she said softly. "Yes," Arvid replied. "The train, it feels like it's home somehow, even though we've been moving for so long." She smiled. "Perhaps that is the place we've been seeking all along." He nodded. The words felt right, though he could not yet explain why. The approach of the final valley. The train slowed gradually, its motion smooth and deliberate. Outside, the night deepened into a shade so rich it seemed woven from velvet and starlight. The snow glowed faintly, and beyond it, hints of landscapes unfurling like secret maps appeared, only to dissolve before you could name them. The passengers quieted, sensing that this would be a place unlike any other. The conductor moved through the aisles, lantern held low, smiling at each person, though his expression carried the weight of things not spoken. "Friends," he said, voice soft but clear. "We are approaching the valley where the night chooses to stay." The phrase sent a ripple of wonder through the carriages. The passengers leaned toward the windows, anticipation softening their breath. "What does it mean?" asked a young scholar from the wool car. The conductor tilted his head. "It means that some nights do not end, not because time forgets them, but because they have chosen a place to rest, and we are fortunate enough to follow." Arvid felt a flutter in his chest. The journey had been full of wonders, but this felt like the culmination. Entering the valley, the train glided forward and the landscape transformed. Trees bent gracefully, their branches woven with frost into intricate patterns. Hills rolled gently, not as obstacles, but as welcoming hands. Streams reflected the sky in ways that seemed impossible, stars bending into ripples, moonlight dancing along water like a slow song. In the valley's center, a village appeared, unlike any Arvid had seen before. Houses were small and welcoming, chimneys sending thin plumes of smoke that glimmered silver in the night. Windows glowed softly. Gardens, though buried under snow, hinted at flowers that might bloom in secret when no one was watching. And yet, the place was empty, not abandoned, but waiting. "Why is no one here?" whispered the child, sitting beside Arvid. The conductor replied, "Because this is not a place for bodies alone. It is a place for hearts. It is where the night rests and where travelers bring what they have carried." The train slowed further, almost to a stop, though it never fully did. Passengers stepped lightly onto the snow-laden platforms, their boots making no sound. Wool, blankets, lanterns, everything felt like an extension of themselves, imbued with the journey's quiet magic. The night itself becomes a companion. Arvid stepped out, feeling the snow beneath him, soft, accepting, warm despite its chill. He looked up, and the stars seemed closer than ever, bending downward as though the night itself wished to observe. He noticed the air had a texture, a weightless, comforting embrace that seemed alive. He turned and saw other passengers. Some walked slowly through the village, touching walls and windows, leaving no mark but the warmth of presence. Others knelt beside frozen streams, whispering quiet words to the ice. All movements were deliberate, gentle, unhurried. The child ran ahead, scattering delicate sparks of snow that glimmered like tiny lights, laughter echoing softly in the valley. The silver-braided woman knelt beside a cottage, whispering to the shutters. Arvid could not hear the words, but he understood the meaning: gratitude, acknowledgement, remembrance. The elderly man with the spindle-spun wool that seemed to absorb the starlight, creating threads that would forever carry a memory of this night. And the conductor, he stood at the train's edge, lantern low, watching. He did not direct. He did not guide. He simply observed, a presence that anchored everything without being noticed. Arvid's moment of arrival. Arvid walked toward the central hill of the valley, feeling the hum of the train through the snow beneath his feet. At the top, a lone tree spread its limbs wide. The frost clung to each branch, sparkling like crystals, and the trunk glowed faintly with inner warmth. He approached it. The air was thick with the sense of every moment that had passed on the train, every quiet kindness, every shared smile, every dream that had begun to walk. He touched the bark. It pulsed softly, as if acknowledging him. He realized that this tree, this place, was not just a destination. It was a living record of the journey, shaped not by time but by care. He knelt beneath it, closing his eyes. The warmth of the train, the wool car, the dreams, the quiet arrivals, the snow-covered villages, they all settled into him. Not all at once, but gently like a tide moving through a calm bay. The night was alive. and he was part of it. Passengers find their own places. Others followed naturally. No one rushed, no one pushed. Everyone found a spot that felt right. The child sat beneath the tree beside Arvid, resting her head on his shoulder. The silver-braided woman perched on a low rock nearby, hands folded around her knees. The elderly man with the spindle unrolled his wool on the snow, letting it glow softly under the starlight. Some passengers wandered the village streets, brushing their hands over rooftops and windows, offering gratitude for places long forgotten. Others knelt at the frozen streams, whispering quietly to the water, leaving warmth behind for anyone who might come later. Even the dreams that had once walked without sleep now gathered in soft clusters, drifting along the snow and hovering over the village, luminous and free. The train itself hummed faintly on the tracks, waiting, a gentle heartbeat in the distance, the conductor's quiet wisdom. At last, Arvid noticed the conductor approaching. Lantern low, face calm, he stopped before the travelers, silent for a long moment. "The night has chosen its place," he said softly. "And it has chosen to stay here with those who carry its warmth. You are all part of it now." A hush fell over the valley, not tense but reverent. "You have traveled far," the conductor continued. "And now you know the truth. The night is never lost. It travels, it rests, it watches. It arrives with care, and it remains with those who let it in." Arvid felt a full exhale leave him. He understood then that the journey had never been about leaving or arriving, but about carrying, sharing, and belonging. The child looked up at him, eyes wide. "Will we leave?" she asked. The conductor shook his head. "Some nights choose to leave. This one has chosen to stay." The words settled like snowflakes on the heart, a calm, joyful closure. The passengers spread themselves gently across the village, the hill, the frozen streams. Laughter rose softly, not loud, not jarring, just a murmur of joy. Arvid Rowan sat beneath the glowing tree, watching the night stretch endlessly. The Islandic night train had moved on quietly, wheels humming far in the distance, leaving its warmth behind. He realized that he did not need the train anymore, not to move, not to guide him. He carried it in his chest. He carried the night. He carried the memories, the quiet kindness, the shared warmth. Around him, the valley glimmered with every act of care from the journey. Every shared cup of tea, every dream that had walked awake, every abandoned village now honored. It all lived here, shimmering under the stars. The child leaned closer to him, resting in quiet trust. The silver-braided woman hummed a gentle tune. The elderly man with the spindle held his glowing wool carefully, as if each thread contained a heartbeat. And Arvid smiled. The night was home. The warmth was complete. And for the first time in a long while, he felt perfectly, joyfully still. The Islandic night train had fulfilled its purpose. The journey had ended, not with a stop, but with belonging. Outside, snow continued to fall gently. The stars above twinkled patiently. The lamps in the village glowed as if they had always been there, waiting for those who finally understood that the night, once chosen, never truly leaves. And inside the hearts of the travelers, a joy remained, soft, everlasting, peaceful. The night had chosen to stay, and so had they.
There's nothing else you need to listen for now. Just let your breathing stay slow and easy. If you're still awake, that's okay. And if you're drifting off, let yourself go gently. I'll be right here next time. Rest well and good night.